Our X-Files. Welcome to our X-Files vault. Regular people talking about unexplained phenomena. UFOs. Ghosts. Cryptids. Hidden archaeology. Weird science. Our stories. Our takes. Our X-Files vault.
To make the school, and there must have been granite or something underneath the hill, so these rock cliffs went up probably about 40 feet high, I guess, and surrounded the school on three sides. And it was I grew up about 2 blocks from here, so it's kind of awesome as a kid because we had some pretty good winters back then, and we used to go sledding down there, which was a little crazy and dangerous, but it was and one of my friends actually broke his collarbone there once, Billy Mahoney. But it was also awesome because you go through this long process of climbing up this trail along the cliff sides, and then once you got to the top and start going down, you had a great long path. You just had to be careful you didn't go off the path, you'd hit a tree or something. I think Billy had a big boulder. That's how he did it. But anyways, Frost School, the cliffs. So 4th grade, I was on the baseball team and we were practicing on the field. My friend Chris was a little guy. He wasn't a close friend or anything. He was just someone I knew from school there. And we had the crazy 4th grade idea of exploring those cliffs. It was his idea for caves. So when practice ended, I went with him. I had my glove and we were walking around exploring every possible nook and cranny of these cliffs, thinking there might be a cave. Maybe we had seen that old Tom Sawyer movie when they go into the cave. I don't know, but there was never going to be any big cave system here. This was not a mountain. This was just a chunk of granite that had been blasted out, which we were too young to understand that then. So there's never going to be a cave, right? Except there was a cave at the very end of our long exploration of trying to get up into every nook and cranny and climbing these. Some of the parts of these were sheer drop, so it was for a little kid it was probably dangerous and stupid to be there, but we didn't know any better. Our parents didn't know any better, didn't know what we were up to. So we found a cave not on the cliffs, but strangely right at the bottom and slightly away from the cliff wall. There was a bunch of big boulders that had kind of collected there. And underneath kind of one, where one met another, there was an opening that went down, that dropped down. And looking into it, I was like, I'm very claustrophobic now. I wasn't then, but still, I'm not that physically courageous. So I had no desire to climb into that thing. So Chris, knowing that this would make it happen, took my glove and tossed it into the hole. And so we both went down into this thing, and sure enough, we found a small cave. We call it a cave system that went further back. And so we went down there, and in the back there was finally another small hole that went into another smaller room that looked like Chris had a flashlight too. And so we were kind of looking around with that. I didn't have one. And so I could not fit through that hole. But Chris was a little guy, so he went through the hole into this room. So I really couldn't see and he had the flashlight too. So I really couldn't see anything. And as far as I could tell, it was a dead end. But he said there were drawings on the wall, like chalk drawings or something like that. Not surprisingly, other kids had probably been down there, right? But there were no other drawings at that point, or no other sign of anybody else having discovered the cave in the other part of this. I'm calling it a cave. I mean, this thing was, probably 4 feet tall by 3 feet wide. That was the main room. And maybe that was a dozen feet long, maybe 20 feet long. And at the end was the smaller room. So that's where that part of the story ends. We eventually left there and went home. Now, Chris made me swear not to tell any of the other kids where the cave was, and I didn't. But at school, he was full of stories about what we had found, and I remember him. He Chris was a really imaginative kid. He was a good drawer himself. He was. I always looked at that and said, "Man, it would be so cool to be able to draw. My niece can draw, and I was like, man, I wish I could do that." But he would draw these little I think they were like little like battle scenarios that he would draw with medieval knights or something like that or whatever it was. But he was able to invent these things in his mind, so he wasn't just like looking at an image and copying it. But he was a very creative kid, and he was a storyteller, a natural storyteller. And what he was telling people was that as he was tracing this swirlish thing that was drawn on the wall of the cave, was that the longer he traced it, the softer the rock was getting. And as he kept doing it, he could eventually see through the rock to another room on the other side, another cave room. And he insisted that if he just did it longer, that he would soften the rock enough that he could crawl through and get to the other room. Now, this is just Chris obviously making up this story for the benefit of everybody else in the fourth grade. But he was one of those kids that could hold your attention by telling a story. So before I get to what goes on in the story, that just kind of brings to mind one of the purposes of this show. Thank you for joining me on the Daily X, and where I will either go over a personal story from my past, or if somebody wants to get in touch with me with one of their stories, or I'll also pick topics that are headlining in the news related to the world of the weird or unexplained or science. I mean, I'm more of a science guy myself. That's what I really prefer. But science stories that challenge our understanding of reality. That's what's perfect, I think, for this show. So, as I said, people I think know my situation by now. Listen on this. So, but my story isn't over, and I still have stories to tell. So thank you for joining me here, and hopefully you'll participate and comment below. When you listen to a story, sometimes the interesting part is actually hiding in the little details, something that doesn't seem crucial to the story, but it's maybe the most important or one of the more interesting aspects of that story. This is true in a lot of movies. Think about, for example, one of my favorite movies is Goodfellas, and there's a famous scene where the Joe Pesci character kills Billy Batts. Billy Batts is the guy who insults him in the bar, saying, "Now get your shine box." The little details that would make that scene so awesome. There's so many of them in it, but one of the ones, for example, as they're beating him up on the floor, killing him, the Joe Pesci character looks at the Ray Liotta character, and he says in an emotional voice, he goes, I didn't mean to get blood on your floor. He's practically crying as he's killing this guy. It was a great detail because it really fleshes out this character, and just like this, it made that character seem, yes, he's violent, he's scary, he's impulsive, he can kill you for no reason at all. He's insecure. He's got a chip on his shoulder because of his size. He's the Joe Pesci is a little guy, and so he made that a big part of that character. So maybe that's what drove him to join the mob in the first place. Think of like Sammy the Bull, and a little guy. So it's just a great little detail. And the thing is, I just explained all why to me that seems like a great detail. But really, the best thing about a detail like that is just to let the detail itself explain it. Let that explain the character. That's much better than me trying to say, yeah, he had something to prove, and he was really emotional, and wasn't, when they killed Billy Batts, he wasn't in full control of himself. He was under the grips of these emotions. But it's just better to just see it in the scene and have that little detail kind of stick in your mind. So that's what makes that scene really good. And so when you tell a story, especially if it's a story about your own personal past, sometimes you'll draw out these little details that you weren't expecting to draw out, or you weren't thinking about, or hadn't thought about in many years. And those are the things that sometimes can make a story, if not interesting, at least revealing about the person who's telling the story, or about something within the story. So you try to keep an eye out for those little details to come on. And as a storyteller, I try to keep out for those an idea for myself what those things might stimulate inside me. So, and I was thinking about it. Now, Chris, this like I said, he was a natural storyteller, but there was a dark side to Chris. I'm not going to say he was a bad kid. I don't really know. I didn't see him, as you'll see from this story. I didn't see him beyond the fourth grade. Uh, who knows if he would have ended up, or how he ended up. But he had a dark side. And again, like the Joe Pesci character, it might have been related to his size. I don't know. But I can remember at one point he became the part of the student patrol. For younger kids, I don't think they have that in schools anymore, because nowadays the bus picks you up and it drops you off right to your mother. So, but back then it wasn't like that. Back then kids walked everywhere they were going. And if there was a bus, it took you maybe for the longest leg in the journey in the middle, but then you still walked a mile at the front and a mile at the end of the journey. So they had student patrols back then where they'd give kids that were a little bit older a badge and this kind of belt thing that went across their chest. And their job was to make sure the younger kids, say the first and second graders, get to their own neighborhood. And especially near the school where there's a lot of traffic, they're supposed to make sure that everybody gets across the track. They entrusted this to the kids. I know they would never do that now. Now you have crossing guards and like I said, the buses and stuff like that. But so I do remember when Chris first got the badge for this. So we're in the fourth grade. He had to, so his job was to make sure first and second graders got beyond the school and safely across. And I can remember the badge, I guess, went to his head, and he wanted to test the bounds of his authority. And he had these kids walking on their knees in the grass, in the mud. That's if you're worried about hearing a story about cruelty to children, that's probably the extent of it. And it probably only happened that first day. I don't know, but the part about the story that is uncomfortable for me is that I was more than just a witness, I guess, because I was bigger than Chris. I could have stopped it. Because I was not in the student patrol, but I was not subject to his authority because I was in the same grade as him. So, but I was there just as someone who knew him as a friend to witness it, and I didn't stop it. And so it's one of those things. It's not like you're witnessing great cruelty. Nobody was getting beat up. You're just talking about making kids walk on their knees, but little kids, taking advantage of that. So it's obviously it was not something that should have been going on. And I don't recall laughing at it or participating in that kind of way. But just the fact that I was watching it was, I'm sure, fed the fact that it was going on. Like Chris was trying to show off to me because I was the only audience. He would have shown off to anybody, not to me personally, but just if it was anybody there, he was going to show off his authority, or maybe he was just going to do it even if there was no one there. I don't know, but having an audience definitely probably contributed to it. So, I look at a story like that. I think about that, and I think, I hope there aren't too many other times like that in my life where I didn't do the right thing and stand up. And I don't want to create the idea that Chris was this really evil kid or something like that. I mean, boys do things, and it was just one of those things that he did. But I also think about that. Why did I go along with it? And here's another thing that really thinking about this. So, when you're a kid, when you're a boy, so obviously certain things mean power. Size is power. The biggest kid obviously has power over the other kids, the best athletes, the strongest kid, the best fighter. That gives you a certain power. That's obvious. But there are other things too. Obviously, I guess in certain worlds, maybe if your father's a cop, or if your father's the mayor or something like that, or Donald Trump or whatever. I guess those things maybe would give certain kids power too. But another thing is actually imagination. At that age, it's hard to have imagination at that age. And if you're a kid in the third, fourth grade, fifth grade, even older, fifth grade, sixth grade, if you're a kid that can tell a story and can really hold an audience and make things up, you will hold kids in awe, and that's power. That gives you power over them. And I think maybe that's why I watched that and didn't didn't participate, but didn't stop it either. And I think I was kind of held in awe by his imagination. He had he in this case, he was exercising his imagination kind of cruelly. He was abusing his authority over these kids, but it was still, he was an explorer testing the boundaries of what that badge brought to him. And as a little kid, to me, that still is like testing boundaries. You're just perceived. That's still, it's like a little kid trying to wonder whether he can swear in front of his parents, or in front, your job as a kid is to figure out what you can get away with. And so there's someone who has that superior either boldness, or in this case, imagination as a storyteller, or different things. He will hold you in awe to a certain degree. You have to outgrow that later on. And I'm sure, kids doing bullying stuff like that usually themselves outgrow it and they don't continue to do it. But so that was a part of that. Anyways, back to finish up this story. So, and here's where it takes the darkest turn. I'm almost even reluctant to say it, but just remember, all this stuff happened in a galaxy far, far away, a long time ago. Just remember that detail so you won't get upset. Well, anyways, 2 years later, I'm at a different school. Sacred Heart School was a Catholic school, now closed. And I remember telling the kids about this cave, and nobody, for whatever reason, it came up, and I was telling kids about a cave where I knew where a cave was at the Frost School. And the kids didn't believe it. Nobody believed it. And so one of the kids finally said, "Let me see it. Let's go. Let's see this cave. Let's go find it after school." So I'm like, "All right, let's do it." And even though it had been 2 years, I remembered exactly where that opening was. And it was one of those things that was kind of hard to find. So I led the kid there, and we went into the opening and went down into the cave. This time we had our own flashlights. So just to set, I'm now in the 6th grade. So we're still pretty small kids, but but when we get down there, what we found was different. Now, all of a sudden, this cave in that ensuing 2 years had become inhabited by other people. Now, there was no one in there at that moment, but what we found was a little boy's paradise, I guess. But there was dirty magazines and stuff that I'm going to guess was probably drugs that we didn't know anything about, so didn't recognize it back then. Candles. So people are obviously hanging around down there. Well, we were down there for a little bit and getting ready to get out of there, and we should have sensed that same, "All right, you're in someone else's place now. Get the hell out of Dodge." We didn't get out of Dodge in time, and the kids that showed up were older kids. Again, I have to be careful what I say, because I knew some of those kids. I know where they are, and they lived in that area. So I know their names even right now. Who knows whatever happened. But anyways, these guys, they were very upset to find us there, and they took us out, and they sat us down on a bench near the school. And actually, this was like a Saturday, I believe, that we were there, Saturday or Sunday. It was a weekend, because there was no one else around the school. And so they had us, and they said, you got to wait here while they were going to get their leader. We didn't call it a gang. I don't know what you'd call it a gang, but they had a leader, and again, I don't want to say his name either, but we want to go get him, and he's going to decide what to do with you kids. So we sat there, when you're under guard by older kids, you just kind of sit there. Even to this day, I wonder, like, what could they have done to us? It's a little scary to think about it. We obviously saw something that they didn't want us talking about. So finally, when the leader showed up, and we had just been sitting there quiet as mice waiting for it, when he showed up, and we were, he thought it over, and he came over to us, and he said, "You're not going to tell anybody what you saw, are you? Because if you do," and I don't remember exactly what they said. This was so long ago. But whatever they said, we agreed to be quiet, and we knew we were going to get, I guess in our minds, an ass kicking. Maybe we'd get worse. I don't know. But anyways, we knew we were going to get beat the hell out of by some pretty tough kids. So we didn't tell anybody. We didn't tell our parents. We didn't tell anybody what happened that day. And it's like a lot of things that happen when you're a kid. If it's you put them out of your mind, and then maybe many years later, something can bring it up again. But I have a very good memory for details, and I won't think about things unless something jars my memory. But then when it does, all the details come flooding back. So anyways, we left there, and then here's where the story, 6 months later, the story takes kind of a strange twist. Well, there was Chris, the original friend, who had abused his authority, who had as a crossing guard, I mean, as a patrol guard or whatever they call those things. He went missing, and the way I even found out about that was it was in the paper. It was a big deal, because they were, the police were looking for him, and this was like a headline story in the paper for several days, and his picture was all over. And I was like, oh my God, that's Chris. That's that kid I used to know at the Frost. And his picture was, like I said, it was in the paper for a few days, and then the story just went away. I don't know if they found him. I don't know if he went back and found, maybe he remembered the cave too, and went there to visit himself for some reason, and ran into those same kids that were trying to hide something. I don't know. If I'm gonna be as good a storyteller as my friend Chris, which I could never, well, my old friend Chris back then, I could never tell a story like him, but he would say he opened up that rock using whatever skill he had of tracing it and went through. And I think that's how he would end this story, that he went through a special door that he opened, and he got through, and hopefully wherever he found inside, he lived happily ever after. Because there isn't a lot of happily ever after in life, but sometimes there is. So that's probably as good a place as any to end this story. So please comment below, join us the conversation on Discord, and thank you very much for your time.